Since noon, Conway and Burke may give notice on another day on matters they wish to raise. Minister Taoiseach and Senator McDowell, you have 4 minutes.
Gael, the programme for government, we are told, contained a statement: we will reform the judicial appointments process to ensure that it is transparent, fair and credible. We will reduce the number of suitable candidates proposed by the Judicial Appointments Commission for each vacancy to the lowest number advised as constitutionally and legally permissible by the Attorney-General, but in any event not more than 3 candidates to be shortlisted by the Judicial Appointments Commission for any vacancy. It also, the scheme for the bill recently published by the government says that it's a requirement that the government is in a position to retain a substantive choice on the as part of the exercise of the executive discretion under Article 35 of the Constitution. The choice that the government must have, given its role under the Constitution, is satisfied by the provision whereby the Commission recommends 3 names. I just want to say at the outset that the Constitution gives to the government, and the government alone, the right to select from eligible persons people who are to be appointed to the judiciary. That's simple. And the government is and has the right, for instance, among High Court judges at the moment, or Court of Appeal judges, to appoint any of them to the Supreme Court as it considers right. That right cannot be taken away from government, and it cannot be subject to a process which seems on the face of it to deprive the government of that discretion. So there is nothing in law that this House or the other House can do, and no bill or no act can change the situation, that if you're eligible to be appointed to the Supreme Court as a matter of law, the government is entitled to appoint you. And there's a huge attempt being made to suggest that somehow, by changing the Judicial Appointments Advisory Board, which was to give advice to the government on the suitability of candidates, to a Judicial Appointments Commission with a small shortlist, that somehow the government will be constrained to appoint from that shortlist. It will not, and it cannot be. And the other great illusion that is being put forward to the people of Ireland is that it is somehow wrong for the Attorney-General or the Minister for Justice or the Taoiseach of the day to say, for instance, see an eminent solicitor or barrister and say, we believe you should be appointed to the bench. And the procedure has been generally that those people apply to the Judicial Appointments Advisory Board, and if they are approved by that board, they are subsequently appointed. But on occasion it has happened that people who have been appointed without any involvement of the Judicial Advisory Boards, from being in a position of a lay practitioner to the superior courts. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that Minister Ross, who has been championing the cause of a lay majority on the Judicial Appointments Advisory Commission, said, according to the Irish Times on Monday, the 21st of November 2016, that the programme for government sets out a commitment to reform the way judges are selected, which would take the process out of the hands of politicians. Now that is untrue, constitutionally infirm and impermissible. It's just I won't use the term, I won't go further than say that it's untrue as a proposition of law. But the second point that has to be made about it is this, that this change is that is now proposed, is the only instance in the common law world, and we are talking about the common law system, the common law judiciary, right across the world, from America to anywhere else. Ireland is the only state where any government has ever proposed having a lay majority on an advisory board. And this is of some significance because if, for instance, a judge of the High Court, under the proposed new scheme, which didn't apply heretofore, was willing to become a Supreme Court judge or a Court of Appeal judge, that judge, under this system, is supposed to submit to an interview process by 7 lay people, who are supposed to then look at everybody else and select 3 people, possibly excluding that judge, from first consideration by the Cabinet. This is an attack on a system that has worked extremely well. And I don't want to push it any further than to say that this will not produce better candidates for the judiciary. This will politicise promotions within the judiciary. It will not. A lot of people who would be good judges or good members of a further up court on promotion will be encouraged by this process from applying. This is a misconceived bill. And I just want to finish on this one last point. Okay, here, look. Deputy Ross, in 2013, as he then was, introduced an amendment to the Constitution Bill to provide that in future the government would have no role in the selection of judges, but that a committee of the Houses of the Oireachtas would do it. And believe it or not, from the opposition benches, he proposed that the government would have to be in a minority on that committee, government supporters. This was his effort at that time to depoliticise the appointment of judges, to hand it over to elected politicians, and he told the Dáil in support of his bill that that committee could debate the merits of individual candidates for the judiciary. And this is the man now who says he wants to take the appointment of judges out of the hands of politicians. I suggest that the government reconsider very, very carefully whether the scheme of the bill that they have now published is going to disimprove the quality of our judiciary, inhibit people from seeking selection, remove the perfectly reasonable choice that the government of the day now has to select from, say, among High Court judges, people for appointment to the Court of Appeal and to the Supreme Court, without having to go through any process.
Minister.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Senator for raising this matter, and I am pleased to address the issue on behalf of the Taoiseach, who apologies she can't be here today. The Government's general scheme of the Judicial Appointments Commission has already been the subject of pre-alleged scrutiny at a meeting of the Joint Committee on Justice and Equality last week, in conjunction with Deputy Jim O'Callaghan's bill. Taking into account the feedback from that committee, the Taoiseach intends to bring forward improved and elaborated proposals in the form of a bill to be published at an early stage for further discussion and examination by both Houses. The Government's proposals arise in the first instance from policy consideration of the responses to a 2014 public consultation and call for submissions on the question of the need for reform of existing provisions for eligibility for judicial appointment. A commitment to the establishment of a new Judicial Appointments Commission was made in the 2016 programme for government, and it's also as part of the confidence supply arrangement between Ireland and Gael. The design of the government proposals, having a lay majority of one and a lay chair, provides for a much-needed critical mass of non-judicial, non-legal people in the selection process and enables a wider set of expertise and experience among lay people to be represented on the Commission. There appears to be no difficulty with the concepts of either lay chair or lay majority in other England or Wales and Scotland jurisdictions, where the procedures have been fully reformed in recent times. Its government programme commitment, the Chief Justice will be a member of the Commission, and as the most senior member of the Judiciary will have both a critical and highly influential impact in relation to the candidate's ability for judicial office, and I believe the overall balance proposed by the government here is correct. No one would disagree that the judiciary has to have an important role to play and a hugely significant input to make in the judicial selection process because of their youth knowledge, skill set and experience. The Taoiseach very specifically acknowledged that this at the Joint Committee discussion last week. Delivering on the programme for government, the government proposals bring down from the present minimum 7 rule to just 3 the names that the Commission will now recommend to the government for appointment. There will be 2 additional names to correspond with each additional vacancy. As the Senator may have noticed, last week the Taoiseach said it was our intention to include in the legislation a prohibition on canvassing which will prevent any person, candidate, applicant or otherwise from seeking to interfere with or compromise in any way the selection procedures. It needs to be emphasised that judicial selection is an administrative or non-judicial as opposed to a judicial function. The formal function of appointing judges by the President is not one of presidential discretion, but is a function which, in conformity with Article 13.9 of the Constitution, is to be performed only in advice of the Government. The current proposals for placement of the GAB with a modernised Commission do not change anything from a constitutional point of view. It is now a standard model international to have a Judicial Appointments Commission in place to select and recommend candidates, while executives remain responsible for the formal act of appointing judges. Building on the enactment of the GAB legislation in 1995, it is clearly a matter for these Houses to consider what should go into legislation to reform the appointment system, and it is a matter for the Government and any Minister of this or the other House, as the case may be, to propose to the Houses what should be in such legislation. There is nothing in the reforms proposed by the Government which impinges on the independence of the judiciary. There is equally nothing in the proposals, nor could there be, which impinges on the constitutional prerogative of the Government to advise on the President on appointments. In fact, the proposed legislation enhances the independence of the judiciary in a number of ways, including by the establishment of a body to design and conduct independent professional selection processes, leading to a recommendation of names of proposed appointees to a judicial office to the government. Engagement with key stakeholders is continuing, and senators will be aware that the establishment or amendment of a judicial selection system through legislation is a matter for the Oireachtas alone, and there is no authority other than the Oireachtas on what the new legislative arrangements may be. It is the Government's prerogative to bring forward proposals to the Oireachtas for enactment, and that is the objective that we are determined to realise. Finally, might I say that the enduring independence of the Irish judiciary has provided a constitutional structure that has enabled the state to withstand enormous political and economic threats to its existence and stability. We should always acknowledge and value this. Thank you.
Briefly.
Well, I thank Minister Stanton for what he said, but I'm getting increasingly alarmed at the inability of the government to admit that it has a constitutional right to appoint any person who is eligible to be a judge, and that cannot be compromised by legislation. This note of the Minister's words just skirts around that issue. The second thing is that I'm conscious of the fact that at least the Minister is here indicating some willingness on the part of the Taoiseach to consider refining the scheme of the bill as published. That's a good thing. But one thing that really leaps out of the words that Minister Stanton has given us here today is the suggestion that there should be a prohibition on canvassing for judicial appointment. That is an alarming proposition. If somebody wants to be considered by the government for appointment to the courts, it is their entitlement to indicate that to the government. There is absolutely no right for these houses to prevent people informing the government of their desire to be appointed to a position. You cannot criminalise it, you cannot make it unlawful or an offence. And so I really do believe that the government should go back to the drawing board with these proposals and ask itself the fundamental question: are we going to have a better judiciary or a far, far worse judiciary if these new proposals are enacted?
I'm sure, Senator, we're well over the time of this issue. We normally allow 8 minutes. We've 12 completed, but I'm sure if the bill is enacted and comes before this House, you'll have something else to say on it, and you'll have your day in court, so to speak. But if you want to briefly respond, we're well over the limit.
Just
and
briefly,
the
the scheme does take full account of the central constitutional tenet relating to the matter that the appointment of judges is a decision of the government in the executive role, albeit that the actual appointment is taken by the President, and appointment can only be made by the President on the advice of the government. And I know that the Judicial Appointments Review Committee is a committee of senior judges which has submitted views on the scheme and very recently, and the Taoiseach intends to meet with them very shortly to discuss the matter further. So this might actually help again, I want to thank the Senator for bringing this very important matter to the floor today. Thank you. I
have no doubt, Minister, that in view of the CV of the particular senator and his prowess in the past, that the Minister will take on board the very